Just recently, I refound my passion in coasters. When I was a kid, I was obsessed with how they were made, all the different manufacturers, and of course getting on any ride that I could. But there was a very long period where I did not go on anything because I had all kinds of other things to be dealing with, school, life, jobs, all that. And because of that, I only have 49 credits under my belt, so keep that in mind when you see this top 10 list. It's gonna look pretty different from a typical coaster enthusiast. And before I get into the list, I would like to make a special shout out to Taylor from Coaster Studios for giving me some advice on where I can find some non-copyright footage. Thank you so much. I would also like to thank Coaster Crutchfield for allowing me to use some of his footage in the video. I really appreciate it. And I would also like to thank Airtime Thrills for the non-copyright footage of his. Thank you all so much. So in the number 10 spot, I am gonna put Scream from Six Flags Magic Mountain. I can already hear people clicking off this video right now. I've noticed a lot of enthusiasts seem to not think very highly of this coaster. They think it has too much of a rattle. It's not exactly a super unique layout or anything. But I happen to really enjoy this ride. Every time I've been on it, I do not have any headbanging that I've heard many other people do. The inversions are a lot of fun. It's not a super forceful roller coaster or anything, but you feel some forces. It's not completely forceless or anything. I will admit though, the reason this is definitely not going to get a higher ranking is because it is one of the ugliest roller coasters I've ever seen. Just the location of it. They literally put it on top of part of their parking lot and never attempted to theme or do anything with it. When they first put it there, I could sort of forgive that, but it's been a long time. They should have done something with that plot of land. Put a tree in there, like, come on. I imagine once I've gone on more roller coasters, like I absolutely am planning a trip to Cedar Point, Busch Gardens, Kings Island, Kings Dominion, and a lot of other really big parks here in America, because I have had it with saying, oh, that's never gonna happen. I have the money, I have the time, I'm gonna make it happen. Once I do, I imagine Scream will not survive the top 10. I highly doubt it. Moving on to number 9, and that's gonna be Mindbender from Six Flags Over Georgia. This, out of all the rides on my list, was the most surprising when I actually first went on it. Off-ride, it does not look spectacular to me. I remember being very unimpressed with it, but after I got off the ride, it was phenomenal. It was really good. On this ride you experience, I'm pretty sure, 5.8 G's at one point. Like, this is a forceful coaster and it doesn't look like it from off-ride, but it truly is. This to me is definitely a back row kind of roller coaster because you really feel the airtime on the hills. Right at the bottom of the first drop is going to be your first loop, and it's pretty forceful. I didn't gray out on that loop, but you definitely feel it. You go into this sweeping left turn drop that goes right next to a waterfall in the pond, and it's really cool to look at. It's actually amazing, and it's, I would say, probably one of the most fun parts of the ride. It's not insanely forceful at the bottom of that hill, but it's just amazing to see all the scenery, the woods, and the waterfall rushing by you. It's really cool. And then you hit your second loop, which is incredibly forceful. Like, that has to be the moment you hit your 5.8 G's, because I gray out every time I go on that. It's been a while since I went on it, but I went on it like 3 times in a row that day, and every single time that second loop made me near blackout. It was very intense. And it's also really cool that that second loop is right over the pond. Like, the setting for this ride is fantastic. I love that you're going through the woods. The theming for the ride is pretty non-existent. I think it's supposed to be a Riddler themed roller coaster, but the fact that I don't even really know that just kind of goes to show there's not a whole lot of theming. It's in the middle of the woods. It's really just the entrance sign that has any kind of theming to it. And next up in number 8 is Silver Bullet. Again, I can feel people clicking away from this video. I noticed Silver Bullet is another ride that seems to get a lot of hate in the coaster community, mostly for the fact that the first drop is very gradual and it's not super intense or anything. But I really love this roller coaster. It has a very unique layout. It has a pretty unique element, I think, with the large overbank turn. I really like that part of the ride. And again, it's fun. Like, I really value my fun in the experience of a roller coaster, and this is always delivered every single time. This is another ride where the theming is pretty non-existent, which is kind of disappointing because Knott's Berry Farm actually does have some pretty good theming for a lot of their rides. This just was not one of them. It's Western themed. You can basically only really tell that by the costumes that the ride operators wear, because they're all dressed up like cowboys and everything. You finish the ride off with definitely my favorite part, which is a very tight helix right over the lake. Off ride, you're like, that doesn't look too crazy, but when you're on it, you feel the blood rushing to your feet, and that is the absolute most forceful moment of the coaster. It's definitely my favorite B&M invert, but that's not a huge statement to say the only other two that I've been on are Batman the Ride and the Great White. And while I can agree with enthusiasts that the Batman clones are very forceful rides, I cannot deny that. They're just a little too short for me, and I don't know, you can call me a snob, but I do really like an original layout for a roller coaster. When I don't know exactly what's going to happen next, I just find it to be a little bit more fun. Moving on to number 7 is Accelerator. Yes, I clearly like Knott's Berry Farm. This ride, in my opinion, is the definition of intense. I've only been on, I think, 5 launching roller coasters in my 49 credits, and this is leagues ahead of any other launch in terms of how snappy it is. 0 to 82 miles per hour in 2.3 seconds. No amount of preparation or how many times you've been on it before will prepare your body for what that launch feels like. It is insane. When they tell you to put your head back against the headrest and keep your arms down, they really mean it. But right after it launches you out at 82 miles an hour and you feel that speed, you feel the acceleration, you get launched up into a 205-foot top hat. And you don't experience any crazy amount of airtime going back down the top hat or anything. That's really not what the ride's about. Because once you hit the bottom of the top hat, you go into these 2 overbank turns, and every single time, without fail, I nearly black out on that moment. I might just have a weak constitution when it comes to these things, but that thing is insane. I cannot see anything by the time the ride is over, and I only regain my vision maybe a couple seconds after we hit the brake run. It's really, really forceful. You get slammed into the bottom of your seat with positive G-forces going around those 2 overbank turns. The biggest con to the ride is definitely the length of it. It's very, very short, but you're definitely not going on this ride for a long experience. I don't know if I could handle a longer experience on the ride. You're definitely going to this one for that launch. That launch is like nothing else. But I would definitely say this is not a roller coaster for beginners. It is a very, very intense ride, and if that's what you like, then you're gonna love it. But if you're not interested in possibly graying out or blacking out, might want to avoid it. Moving on to number 6 is Goliath from Six Flags Over Georgia. This is the only B&M hypercoaster I've ever been on. This thing is an airtime machine. It's not ejector airtime, it's a lot of floater airtime, but it's really, really fun. The first drop isn't insane or anything. On the back, you definitely get more airtime than on the front, and it technically just barely makes the hyper requirement by the drop being exactly 200 feet. But after that first drop, you're gonna shoot up into a big airtime hill. Again, you get lots of floater airtime. I'd say it's a little bit better at the back. After that, you're gonna drop down and take a tight left turn into another big airtime hill. And this leads to my favorite part of the ride, because you're actually going over this big lake during this one section, and you hit a very tight helix, which is super forceful. Then you go up into a much smaller airtime hill, again get a lot of floater off of that. Then you're gonna go up into this really interesting overbank turn. I remember watching that off ride thinking, oh, that's probably a super forceful moment of the ride, but I've never found that moment to be super impressive. It's cool because you're right above I don't remember if it's the freeway or the parking lot at that point, but you're above a bunch of cars basically just looking down at the street. After that, you're gonna go up into another floater airtime hill, followed by another floater airtime hill, and at this point you're going over other rides and through the forest and different parts of the park, which is awesome. I've heard conflicting reports on this ride, that this is one of the best B&M hypers, that it's one of the worst. I happen to really love it. If you like airtime, you're gonna love this ride. It has tons of it, and it does have that really intense stance helix where you're pushing a lot of positive G-forces as well. So yeah, overall, it's a really good coaster. It's definitely my favorite at Six Flags Over Georgia. You will not see another ride from that park on this list. Moving on to number 5, we're headed back to Six Flags Magic Mountain with Tatsu. This is another hot point of debate, I suppose. Some people really love flying coasters, some people really don't. I'm definitely in the I love flying coasters. I really love the sensation that a flying coaster gives you, and I do not find the restraints to be uncomfortable or anything. I actually like how bulky and I suppose overwhelming the restraints are. You feel very, very, very secure in those rides. And Tatsu is... it's one of those rides that takes you by surprise just out of nowhere, because the first moments of the ride are very fun and graceful, not super forceful or anything, and then you get to the pretzel loop. This is the only point in the ride where you're going to be brought all the way back down to ground level, and it brings you down to ground level really, really fast. The forces you feel at the bottom of this pretzel loop and then coming back out of it are insane, and it's really strange that it's the one part of the ride where you get some really intense forces and the rest of it is just so graceful and floaty. And I will say this element is so intense, it's not for everyone. And the whole time you're flying very high above like a whole section of the mountain with a bunch of trees and everything, which is beautiful to look at, and it really aids to the fact that it's a flying coaster. You really feel like you're flying like above the trees and everything. It's awesome. Yeah, overall I really, really like this roller coaster. It's not forceful until it is. Nothing really beats that sensation of flying over the trees and the mountain of Magic Mountain. It's an amazing location. They could not have picked a better spot to put that ride. Anyways, number 4 is Hang Time. Yeah, we're back to Knott's Berry Farm. I just very recently went on Hang Time on my last trip in March, and I marathoned the hell out of this ride. I was very, very impressed. Most roller coasters do not scare me, really. I just enjoy them. But I legitimately felt a little scared hanging there at the top, especially on the front row, because when you're hanging there, you're really getting like pushed forward into your restraint, and it's just a lap bar, like a clamshell restraint lap bar. So you're very open, you're very exposed. There's no sides on the train, there's no front to the train. You just feel like you're going to fall out. Obviously you're perfectly safe, but that's one of the rides that genuinely made me a little fearful again. The vertical lift hill is very fun, very intimidating to look at, and when you're on it, you actually do feel yourself slip just a little bit backwards into your chair, which can be a bit unnerving, so I enjoyed that a lot. The only other vertical lift hill I've ever been on is Daredevil Dive at Six Flags Over Georgia, but in my opinion that ride was not anywhere close to as good as Hang Time. It was still a good ride, don't get me wrong. Hang Time did have a little bit of a rattle later in the day once it had warmed up after a bit. Nothing crazy, it didn't deter from my ride experience, but I definitely preferred my rides in the morning when it was much smoother. And it still felt like it was hauling through the layout too. It didn't feel like it was sluggish at all. The theming on this ride is fairly minimal, but I do like that they kind of went for the surfer theme. Like they actually made the backs of the seats look like surfboards. And the entrance archway is decently themed. Sitting on the back is definitely where you're going to get the most airtime on this ride, because you get whipped over that drop on the back. On the front, not nearly as much, but it's still a very unique sensation, a beyond vertical drop. It's a fairly short ride, but at the same time, it's not so short you'd be upset waiting for it, I don't think. I can't say for sure because I did not wait for this ride at all. There was nobody going on it in the morning, so I marathoned it a few times. And in the number 3 spot is X2. Accelerator was one of those rides I described as just insanely intense. This is similar, but it's a very different kind of intense. This ride discombobulates you more than anything I have ever been on, including some really crazy flat rides. 2 seconds into the ride after you leave the lift hill, you do not know which way is up, which direction you're going, what you're feeling. It is so confusing, honestly, in a really good way. I would argue the ride is maybe a little bit too short, but at the same time, I don't know if I could handle much more discombobulation on that ride without getting nauseous or anything. And it's definitely the most unique type of roller coaster I've been on. Fourth dimensional roller coasters, I want to say there's only like 3 of them in the world, maybe only 2. Hold on. Fourth dimensional models. What? Okay, so it's the only fourth dimensional Aero model, and there's only 2 other SNS versions of that ride. This is also a ride that does actually have some really impressive stats. A 215-foot drop, 76 miles per hour. The first drop is at an 88.5 degree angle, so it's near vertical. I mean, it might as well be. It feels like it is. And that's when it flips you forward completely, so you are facing straight down at the ground, and then you head down the main drop and it flips you over onto your back before going into this huge Raven turn. After that, you're going to go into this what looks like a little airtime hill, but it actually rotates your seats a full 360 degrees, so it almost acts as like a loop or a 0G roll, I suppose. You then go into a large turnaround section. This is the only part of the ride where you're going to actually regain your senses and know what the hell is going on around you. But then they make up for it by going straight down into a fly to lie, which again, I don't know how to describe that feeling at all. After that, you go into a much smaller Raven turn, which I remember feeling the force on that quite a bit, actually. This is also where the fire cannons will shoot off. I have never been lucky enough to actually go on this with the fire or the music playing. And then immediately after this smaller Raven turn, you go into another fly to lie right into the brake run. And going into the brake run, your seats kind of like lurch forward. As I said at the start, this is a very intense, discombobulating roller coaster. It's, again, not for everyone. I can see why some people would not like the ride because it's just so crazy. But it is definitely one of the most unique experiences of my life. I loved it. Coming into my number 2 spot is the last ride from Knott's Berry Farm, Ghost Rider. I love this ride. This was the first wooden roller coaster I ever went on. I haven't been on a whole lot, but nothing has even come close. The next best for me would be Apocalypse the Ride, which is a great wooden roller coaster, but it's got nothing on Ghost Rider. And this is coming from someone who has not been on it since the retracking. When I went in March, of course, that was the one ride that was closed for maintenance, which crushed my heart, but oh well. Next time I go, you better believe I'm getting on that thing. Because as a kid, the ride was, in my opinion, it was a little rough. It's a wooden ride, but it was not uncomfortable at all. And then as a teenager, I still didn't think it was too rough or unenjoyable or anything. A lot of people at that point were complaining that it was becoming far too rough to enjoy the ride anymore. So I can only imagine what it's like now that it's been retracked by GCI. It's also pretty well themed, I think. There's a really cool entranceway that you have to go through. It's like a little tunnel, and then you enter this like heavily barn themed kind of station, which makes the very long waits for this ride bearable. And I really like that this ride doesn't start with just a simple turn into the lift hill or go into the lift hill right away. It actually has like this little pre-drop section where you go right next to the queue line and then into the main lift. It's not like a thrilling section or anything, but I enjoy when the coaster gives you like a little tease at what's to come. Combined with the fact that you're going through the structure of most of it very frequently, and I think the fact that it's a wooden roller coaster, you really feel the speed on it. The head choppers and the speed you feel from going through the structure is just amazing. It makes the second half of the ride definitely the best part, I think. And then you launch up into the best part of the ride, which is the ending helix, which is very notoriously unbanked, so you are just getting thrown to the left side of the train during the whole thing, and it's a pretty sustained helix. Like, you're going through it for a while. This ride never fails to completely impress me. It is, in my opinion, by far the best ride at Knott's Berry Farm. I've heard people say they only go to Knott's Berry Farm just to go on this one ride and then leave to go to Six Flags, and I completely understand. Like, Ghost Rider is, I can't really say world class. I haven't been anywhere outside the country, but it's so good. is phenomenal. And finally, on to number 1, and it's going to be Twisted Colossus at Six Flags Magic Mountain. This, at the moment, is the first and only RMC coaster I have been on, and if this is supposed to be a mid-tier RMC, I cannot wait to finally get on Steel Vengeance and Iron Gwazi and all these other amazing RMCs that are out there in the country and now around the world. What that coaster manufacturer is doing is unbelievable in my opinion. They are really pushing boundaries and doing something unique. I was lucky enough to experience a race on my very first ride on this, and I actually got a whole train to myself. It was the very first ride I went to when I got to Six Flags. I'm like, I gotta go on this. I gotta see, what all the hype's about with RMC. I gotta see if it's actually as good as people say it is. And oh my gosh, yes. Oh my gosh. This may not be as insanely intense as a ride like X2, but it absolutely took my breath away. It's a ride that features very unique elements that I have not experienced on other roller coasters. So let's just jump into it. The lift hills, I think, are definitely the drawback to the ride. It definitely pulls all the momentum out of it. And sometimes they send one lift hill up a lot slower than the other just so the trains can catch up so they can race. But at the same time, it's kind of a nice break in between the intensity of the actual ride. Again, off-ride, it doesn't look that impressive, but you get thrown out of your seat during the airtime moments on this ride. You're gonna go up into this high five element where both the trains are facing each other. On the blue side, it's much less impressive because you don't switch directions at all. You just kind of go up into this sideways airtime moment. The sideways airtime is really cool. I've also never experienced that on a roller coaster, but I think it's definitely better on the green side. So after you exit the high five, you're gonna go into a little airtime moment and down drop, hit another speed hill, and then hit a very aggressive ejector airtime hill, which goes right below the Top Gun stall of the green track. And it is really fun, like pointing and trying to reach out for the other train while they're all looking down at you it's awesome. I love the interaction on the ride. After this airtime moment, you're gonna go into your first inversion, which is a 0G roll. It's very snappy, so in my opinion, you don't really get any weightlessness off of it, but it's fun. Then you're gonna go into this double up, which gives you some pretty good airtime. Turn to the left, then you have this outward bank turn, which is awesome. It really throws you out of your seat there and towards the other train. Basically, it's like right at the other track. Then you dip under the structure and then go into the second lift hill, and this is where the blue track turns into the green track. I kind of wish I had gone on the ride not knowing that it's a Mobius loop and you get the blue and the green. I feel like that would have been an awesome surprise, like, oh I'm on the green now, this is crazy. But I definitely watched a lot of POVs before I went on it. And on my second go around on the green track, I was not racing another train, which did take away from it a little bit. It definitely is far better when you're racing another train, but I also went on the slowest day I've ever seen at Magic Mountain. I literally think it was me and maybe 50 other people, tops. So there was no line for anything. Like I said, I got the whole train to myself, and that has never happened on a roller coaster. Once you reach the top of the lift hill, you're going to head into your second drop. I believe it's the exact same stats as the first drop, but I swear it feels steeper. It just does. Then you're gonna go into another speed hill, and at this point, the track pretty much mirrors the other side, but once you get to the high five, you go from turning quickly to the left, and then it banks you over to the right, which, again, it throws you out of your seat right there. I really prefer the green side for the high five moment. And I also prefer the green side for what happens right after this, because then you go into this really cool double down, which gives you, again, a lot of airtime. And then you go into my favorite part of the ride, the Top Gun stall. The hang time you get on this moment is amazing. And it's so cool, like dangling right above the other train, looking down at them. Like I said, at this point, there wasn't another train for me to be interacting with, but when I went on the ride later, I did get another race on the green side that time. After this, you're gonna go into a little twisted airtime hill and then back into the double up, turn to the left, and then you are basically into the brake run. And that about does it. Those are my top 10 coasters from the 49 credits that I've had. Feel free to comment or list any roller coasters that you've been on that you really like. I've never done anything like this for this channel, so I don't imagine this is going to get like a huge amount of views or anything. But as I said at the beginning, I've rediscovered my passion in coasters and I really want to get back into it again, so expect future content like this from this channel. Yeah, that's about it.